Introduce to you Ms. Shaleigh Howells.
Thank you. All right. First, I'd like to say thank you for all of you joining me this evening here. It's great to see a full room. Great to be back in front of people. Have been doing a lot of virtual lectures recently, but not a ton in person. So it's really, really great to be able to do that. Also like to thank Hampton History Museum for the partnership and being able to put this event on. I'm very grateful for the collaboration and some projects that we're working on with them outside of just this particular event this evening. So I just want to give a little information about myself. My name is Shaleigh Howells, as she shared with all of you. I'm a non-native advocate and representative for the Pamunkey Indian Tribe. I work as the Cultural Resource Director for the tribal government, and I also serve as the Museum Director for the Pamunkey Indian Museum and Cultural Center. So my background is museum studies and is repatriation and NAGPRA management. I did that for many years on the institutional side and have been able to transition and bring that in to the work that I do in the cultural sector. My education, I have a BA in history and political science, and then I also have a master's in museum studies. Before we get into kind of the lecture, I'll tell you right off the bat, we're going to be going all over the place. It's going to be pretty quick. 40 minutes is a pretty tight timeline to talk about a lot of things, both from historical standpoint to contemporary. But I do want to do a land acknowledgement here. So a land acknowledgement is a traditional custom used in many Native nations and communities, and it has been that way over time. Today, land acknowledgements are used to recognize indigenous peoples who are the original stewards of the land on which we now live. These can be complex depending on the area of acknowledgement due to the movement of people over time. Today, I'm going to open with a broad acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge the indigenous people who are the original inhabitants of the land in which we all occupy today. I want to acknowledge and recognize the tribes of contemporary Virginia and the historical tribes of the region. I'd like to acknowledge, respect, and honor all of the tribal members, past and present. I'd also like to take this opportunity to do a language acknowledgement and talk a little bit to give context as I move through wording and some of the things that I'll use. For my brief language acknowledgement, I'd like to just share that pronunciation of names and places, particularly Algonquin words, have been taught to me by the community in which I work, and I do my best to honor these enunciations. There's variations between communities on some of these words. I also use collective language. This is driven by community engagement. So the use of we throughout the presentation is not an inclusion of myself into the community that I work with, but a manner by which I can convey the work that we are collectively doing together. I also will interchange different terms, so Native American, Indigenous, Indian, as these are all generally accepted within the Pamunkey tribal community. I will also mostly use tribal citizen in place of tribal member. This is important and is preferred as the tribe is a sovereign nation. So just to give some context as we move through the presentation here. I will start with just a brief history, so a very kind of overhead history of pre-contact. And when I'm talking about pre-contact, I'm talking prior to the English arriving here in the United States or here in Virginia. I'd like to kind of start our conversation with the Powhatan creation story. So Ahone, the creator, who took the form of a great hare, came from the rising sun, carrying a magic bag containing man and woman. After creating the world and populating it with deer, Ahone took man and woman from the bag and placed them into the world to live in harmony. Often, when Native people are asked, how long have you been here? They'll respond with, we've always been here and we are still here. The Powhatan creation story honors this statement and does the physical evidence from the region. Today, indigenous presence in Virginia prior to contact is typically discussed from an archaeological perspective. And it's divided into three main periods that I'm going to talk about today. So the Paleo-Indian period was 15,000 to 8,000 BCE. While the first inhabitants of Virginia arrived around 15,000 years ago, about the same time as the end of the last ice age, the Algonquin-speaking indigenous people can trace their history back to approximately 12,000 years ago. Early evidence of inhabitants in Virginia points to evidence from Clovis points here that date to about approximately 11,000 years ago. The map here shows, and it is not completely accurate, but it is a good reference for visual, shows areas where different language groups lived here in the state of Virginia. So in the orange, you have the Algonquin-speaking nations. Siouan is in the pink, and then Iroquoian language, the language group or tribes in the purple areas. So just so you have an idea of where some of the areas that I'm going to be focusing on, we're going to be focusing on the Algonquin-speaking tribes here in Virginia, so that orange group. Moving into the Archaic period, so that's 8,000 to about 1,000 BCE. By the end of this period, there's tens of thousands of indigenous people here in Virginia. Bands begin to settle into hamlets, or what would have been small settlements in the area, and these would have been focused in floodplains because these areas provided rich food for the communities. Food security and settlement led to the early rise of tribal identity and social structure within some of these hamlets or settlements. Then into the Woodland Period, so 1000 BCE to contact, so that contact period I discussed a little bit earlier. Around 12,000 BCE, there's evidence of pottery making and permanent housing, which points to a shift in Virginia's indigenous lifestyle from transient to sedentary. By the late Woodland Period, indigenous people lived in large villages with hundreds to thousands of people under a complex system of political, economic, and social structure. The ranking of the culture and individuals emerged during this Woodland Period. Items became specialized, so things like the introduction of the bow and arrow and more specialized tools and points, and trade increased. So beads began to be traded for adornment. Adornment was showing status. And so I can get into a whole thing with that, but we'll just talk very briefly on that. Indicating sophisticated craftsmanship and a rich culture that flourished here in Virginia. Their creation of wealth, social security, and political interests gave rise to tribal leader. Senecameca, also known as Powhatan Paramount Chiefdom, Powhatan Confederacy, there's also other additions of that terminology, was a political alliance that arose out of the late Woodland Period among numerous Algonquin-speaking tribes in the region. It is estimated that there were approximately 30 different tribal groups that paid tribute to the paramount chief of the Confederacy. Many of you may know him as Powhatan, who is also known as Wahaseneca, with a total estimated population of about 15,000 people at this time. The pre-contact period I've been talking about ends basically in 1607 when the English began a permanent settlement at Jamestown. So I know there's Roanoke, we're talking permanent settlement here in Virginia. While indigenous peoples were here long before the English, the impact of colonization was devastating for Native communities here. This evening, I'll discuss the impacts of treaty making, the denial of civil rights in the state of Virginia, and the importance of legal recognition for indigenous communities. Okay. So I'm going to, again, bounce into a couple different areas here. So moving forward pretty quickly in timeline for history, we're going to jump to 1646. So the Treaty of 1646 placed Indians in eastern Virginia under the control of the King of England, providing them protection from other tribes and then also encroaching settlers. There was a lot of conflict in different areas at this time. And so the English designated a reservation at Pamunkey Neck. It's a thumb of land at the bend of the river that bears a tribal name. This is the seat of the Pamunkey tribal government even today. And so that's the red arrow there. That is the Pamunkey Reservation today. And it was part of the original treaty territory. While the treaty guaranteed land security, it also imposed many restrictions on the Indians. It confined them to land north of the York River, prohibited them from interfering with the English settlement south of the river, and required them to communicate with the government by messengers while dressed in distinctive clothing. Today we have a replica of one of these striped coats in our collection at the museum, and it's currently on public display, and it was made as a reproduction by Colonial Williamsburg. Moving a little forward into the timeline, but again setting up some of these important things for land and for later treaty being requirements. It's the Treaty of 1677 or the Treaty of Middle Plantation. It was enacted in May 1677 and signed by a Pamunkey female warrants, meaning a leader, chief, Kakakoweski. She is believed to be the niece of Powhatan. The treaty designated signatory tribes or tributary tribes, which guaranteed them control over their own traditional homeland, hunting and fishing rights, and the right to keep and bear arms, and other rights so long as they maintained their loyalty to the English crown. We have a replica of one of the badges used by Indian messengers while within English territory. It's called a frontlet. We do have it on display in the museum. So the one here is the original frontlet. The original frontlet was repatriated back to the tribe in 2017 from Preservation, Virginia. We currently, through the museum, have it on long-term loan. It's at Jamestown Rediscovery right now, and we'll be moving to Jamestown Yorktown Foundation for an exhibition this fall. But the tribe does own that after the repatriation several years ago. So I talk about those early treaties because I can't talk about those without talking about contemporary tax tribute that happens here in Virginia today, and that is an important part of the fall things that the tribe is doing. So both the Pamunkey and the Pamunkey Indian tribes are the only tribes that still pay tribute in the form of game and gifts to the governor of Virginia each autumn. It's usually in November. This is because they have maintained control of portions of the land seceded by the English under this treaty, the Treaty of 1677. That's forming what is part of both the reservations the tribes hold today. On the left-hand side, that is the 2017 ceremony. So you have Governor Terry McAuliffe and Pamunkey tribal citizen Ethan Brown. And he is gifting one of his gourd works as part of the tribute during that ceremony. And the other one here is the 2021 ceremony, which marked the 344th tax tribute ceremony in the state of Virginia between the two tribal governments in the Commonwealth of Virginia. While the 12,000 acres that make up the Pamunkey Indian Reservation today is only a small portion of the original territory that the tribe had rights to under the treaty, the original treaty territory set aside an exclusive zone for Native Americans that was approximately 18,000 acres. So just to give you an idea of how much that area has shrunk into common day today. All right. Again, setting up a lot of that treaty work to talk about sovereign nation. So I want to talk a little bit about just some the Indian relations here in Virginia with the United States government and the Virginia government. So a little snip on military service. So Pamunkey citizens have served in all U.S. military campaigns from the American Revolution. During the Civil War, there was an interesting period. Service included some tribal citizens working with Allen Pinkerton as Union spies. Union soldiers also had an encampment on the reservation, did some conscription of cattle and fence posts. And even today, we have citizens who serve in the military. Our current chief is a retired U.S. Air Force Chief Master Sergeant, and he served 32 years in the military. Kind of transitioning a little bit and talking about civil rights, as I alluded to earlier. So the denial of civil rights here in the state of Virginia really came to a head with the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. Some may have heard of this as the one-drop statute here in the state of Virginia. The law defined a white person as one with no trace of blood of another race. Legal documents that formally you can indicate that you were Indian on no longer had a designation for that. The only thing that you could choose was Negro, colored, or mulatto. The act banned interracial marriage by requiring marriage applicants to identify their race as white, colored, or mixed. As a result of Virginia's black laws, it created paper genocide here in the state for Native Americans, and it was literally erasure via law and documentation. Native Americans here, many migrated out of the state. For the Pamunkey people, many went to Philadelphia. So, there was better jobs, better education, and more personal freedoms outside of the black laws here in the state of Virginia. And then moving again ahead a little bit into 2015. So talk about federal recognition for the tribe. The Federally Recognized Indian Tribe Act, List Act, was enacted by Congress in 1994, which formally established 3 ways in which an Indian group may become federally recognized. The first is by administrative procedure, which is the FAP or BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs process, and by an act of Congress or by a decision of a United States court. Today in Virginia, there are 7 federally recognized tribes. There's 11 state recognized, and of those 11, 7 are federally recognized. The Pamunkey Indian Tribe took on the demanding FAP or BIA process. It took almost 4 decades to compile the documents required to get federal recognition. On July 2nd, 2015, the BIA announced that the Pamunkey Indians' long-fought battle to be a recognized tribe had been approved, and they were the first Indian tribe in the Commonwealth of Virginia to be federally recognized. The other 6 tribes here in Virginia had been seeking federal recognition through an act of Congress since the 1990s. And they were federally recognized via enactment in 2018. The photo here on the left is Joyce Crisball and her daughter Becky when Joyce was told that the tribe had gained recognition in July 2015. She was on her way into the work at the museum. And then the one other photo here is the Pamunkey Federal Recognition Celebration that was held on the reservation in May 2016. So just some basic statistics for the tribe, post federal recognition as things have changed and enrollment has opened much more. So currently the tribal enrollment is just over 450 tribal citizens. Of that, about 220 live here in the state of Virginia. And again, because of the diaspora during the 1920s, in the Philadelphia area, there's just over 100 tribal citizens still living in that area with their families. On the reservation itself, there's 45 households, and there's about 100 residents. About 2/3 of that is tribal citizens, and then another third are family members, so spouses, stepchildren, things like that. So kind of moving into day-to-day work for myself as a tribal government employee. So here's a brief overview of the tribal government kind of structure. So the government itself, the leadership is a chief and a council of 7. So current chief is Chief Robert Gray. There are 7 tribal council persons. They are elected officials. And of the 7, 1 serves as an assistant chief for the tribe. You can also see some of the offices that we have under the tribal government office, so housing, enrollment, and things like that. I work out of the Tribal Resource Office. So under the Tribal Resource Office, we have the Cultural Resource Department and the Natural Resource Department. I serve as the Cultural Resource Director. So I manage our tribal archaeology and historical preservation manager. It's currently a vacant role, but serves in the role of like a THPO, which is a tribal historic preservation officer that larger nations usually have a THPO office in place. and then museum associate. And then I work very closely with the Natural Resource Department. Our Natural Resource and Environmental Director position just recently became open also, so that is one that we're looking to fill too. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Cultural Resource Department. So from the Cultural Resource Management side, we do a lot of consultation. So this is going to be federal, state level consultation. It can be consultation with different entities. So sometimes, for example, I'll work with museums doing consultation on exhibition or programming development. It kind of runs the gamut for consultation there. Also do a lot of public outreach. We're doing several public art installations in Richmond area coming up. All of that is driven by our tribal citizen panels that are leading the narrative for that and the artwork and stuff, so really cool things. Obviously programming such as this falls under that public outreach, and also tribal citizen resources. So a big one that we've really been pushing is that our tribal citizens are provided stipends or payment for any work that they do, even if it's coming out of our office and not the entities that we're working with. We want to make sure people are getting paid for their time and for their knowledge, and you know, everybody's at max capacity these days, so being mindful of that. Also with that too, providing any resources tribal citizens or cultural bureaus need to provide classes for the community. So whether that's space, whether that's actual resources in that they need beading for beadwork or pottery supplies, we do all of that under the Cultural Resource Management. And then under the department, we also have the Pamunkey Indian Museum and Cultural Center. So we do have a tribal museum collection, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also have a community center, so sometimes during the month, we'll have bingo for the elders during the day in that space. We also do programming both for public and tribal citizens in there. And of course, we are always doing public tours and programming on site and again, off site when we're able to. Right. So this is just a list of some of our current projects under the Cultural Resource Department. I am not going to go through each of these, but please feel free to kind of read through as I talk about two areas. I want to talk about two examples of some of the work being done under the department and some of the projects that we have. So one is NAGPRA, or repatriation of objects under collective consultation. For those of you that are not familiar with NAGPRA, it stands for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and it is federal law, and it was enacted in 1990. And under this law, it's put in place to protect cultural, biological remains of Native Americans and their ancestors and funerary objects. So under this legislation, human remains, funerary objects, both affiliated and unaffiliated with burials, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony are protected. And so this is what we do. A lot of our work, and a lot of this work is done, like I said, collective consultation with other tribes here in the state of Virginia too. I get asked a lot about some things by the public that fall under NAGPRA or don't fall under NAGPRA. An important cultural artifact that's not protected under NAGPRA that comes up in conversations all the time is Powhatan's Mantle. Powhatan's Mantle is a piece that's held in a museum in Oxford University, and it's recorded that the mantle was presented as a gift in, I believe it was 1608, to Captain Newport from Powhatan as a gift for King James I. It doesn't fall under NAGPRA. It does not have a burial context. It also was gifted, or at least that's how it was recorded. And so that is an item, as much as a lot of nations believe it should come back, it may not. There's a lot that goes into the cultural law and ethic law there. And the other thing that I want to kind of highlight here is contemporary narratives. So again, we've been working really hard to make sure that we're working with entities and that we're working with our tribal citizens to portray contemporary narrative kind of publicly in different spheres that hasn't been done before. So accurate representation and inclusion of Native narrative and oral history outside of academia and publishing also. So a really great example of that, the tribe is currently working with Encyclopedia Virginia to update all of its public entries on its website. So that it's one of those things you search, it's one of the first things that comes up for the public, so making sure that we're including appropriate and narrative there. So I'll talk a little more about the museum. So I'll talk about kind of the founding of it and a little bit about the exhibition spaces too. So the museum itself is really a model for community and inclusion. It's also ideal, it falls outside the regular scope of museum collecting in that most of the material in the museum is on long-term loan from tribal citizens or their families. So this idea of collective ownership is very different than a standard museum. And so the way that we work with the collection is different. A lot of times I will call in family members when I'm working on particular pieces to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence and that we're caring for the item in the appropriate manner. Also shared tribal knowledge, and we are working very hard even at the museum to provide more contemporary narrative. The museum was opened in 1980, so I'll talk a little bit more about why that contemporary piece is important. So the museum was founded kind of in an interesting way. It was founded under the Pamunkey Project, which was done in 2 phases. So phase 1 began in 1974, and it was under Eric Callahan, who was an experimental archaeologist. He began living along the Pamunkey River in these 1-month living experiences, and he basically built middle to late woodland style encampments, so as you would see here. And so was living in these, and it kind of evolved, and they started to work with the Pamunkey community in about 1975, 1976. The project, the first project was a recreation of longhouses on the reservation in 1978. So this is on the reservation, but very similar to what he was already doing earlier in the 70s. From that, Eric, Mr. Callahan started to work with a tribal citizen, Warren Cook, who is a tribal elder still living today, to secure grant funding. And that's the funding they used to build the museum. So the museum is really interesting. Like I said, it was built in 1980. I believe it opened October 11th, 1980. And so most of the exhibition space has been very much untouched. And so for a museum with an exhibit that's over 40 years to still be relevant is really cool. And I really like it. I love the way that it's set up. It needs some maintenance, things need turnover, it needs some love, some preservation and stuff like that. But overall, it's a great space to work with kids in. Everything is on a timeline. All of the cases are numbered and everything is color-coded. I mean, you can't get much better trying to go through an exhibition space with a school group than those things. So you can see here, I've got some notes. So the blue throughout the exhibit is talking about the way of life for the Pamunkey people at that time. And the timeline goes basically from the end of the Ice Age through to the late Woodland Period, just before pre-contact. Green discusses the natural environment, so where the Pamunkey people actually lived, what that looked like, how the land has changed over time, and then yellow is settlement, so the types of houses people lived in, tying back into where they lived also. Our 4th grade program is geared towards Virginia SOLs and about place, so settlement and natural environment are 2 things that we really focus on when we have school groups. And then subsistence is a really big one. So subsistence is red, and this shows food that indigenous people in Virginia ate. how they survived, some of the time some of the tools that they may have used. We have gotten a lot of outreach for projects on foodways. That's a topic that's come up a lot more. And so that's been really great to even work with some adults kind of in that exhibition space, talking about food and how food has changed and how food movement moves with people and things like that. All right. So for the museum, we also kind of have an ongoing laundry list of projects that we're working on too. And so these are just, again, a few of them and some photos. So the top kind of photo is when we did collections inventory. When I came on, there was not an inventory for any of the collection material that was in storage. So we now have at least a baseline inventory so that we know what we have, and also so we can better execute loans. So if we get a loan request, before it was like, we don't know what we have. So now we do. And so everything is appropriately boxed and baseline tagged, and we again have a baseline running inventory, both the digital and written, so that we can mark things as we take things out of the collection. We don't have a computer at the museum currently, so that's kind of our way to work through that. And then the other photo in the same kind of space is one of our school programs that we do. We do a clay program. That's a program, again, while we do a clay program, it's an air dry. We are not using traditional Pamunkey river clay. We do always work with a tribal citizen for that program. So it is a potter. They teach that program. I do not teach that program. So that's really important. And then that person gets paid for the work that they're doing with that school group also. So just kind of some highlights there. Two big ones that I'll highlight too is the Historical Site Preservation Survey. This has been an ongoing project. We are trying to look at the historical buildings on the reservation, where there's delayed maintenance, what we can do to do some mitigation of that, and what are going to be the long-term uses of those buildings for the community. Of course, the museum, the schoolhouse, and the pottery studio that I'll talk about in just a moment, all of those things are not going anywhere. But how can we use them better within the community? And what does public access look like? And that a lot of that too will be driven by what the tribe and the tribal citizens want to do. And the other one is ADA compliance. So the museum, when I came on again, had minimal ADA compliance. And we have several tribal citizens who are handicapped, and of course, being open to the public, we wanted to be able to have better access to the collection and to the museum. So we now have a ramp to be able to get into the museum. We're working on our bathrooms to kind of restructure so that they're safer just in general, but also more accessible for individuals. So that's going to always be kind of an ongoing thing, but we do have now too a handicap parking spot. So things that are really, you don't think about, but are really, really important, especially for the public. So just kind of quickly talking about some of the buildings on the reservation. Talked a lot about the museum already, but like I said, it was founded in 1979 and opened in October 11th, 1980. And probably my favorite thing about the museum outside the collection and the exhibition is the actual physical building itself. It is this beautiful representation of mid-century modern architecture, late 70s period. The arched roofline is in the clerestory windows are meant to replicate the shape of an Algonquin longhouse. I've also heard from some elders the kind of movement of the river too. So I personally just love the building. It's a really cool building. And then we do have an old community building. It's kind of off to the side of the museum building. That's been used over the years for many different things. That's one of the buildings we're trying to assess. Should we be putting some money and effort into it? What's the long-term use of it? Can we do artist studios? Can we do a library? There's a lot of things on the table for that one. For that particular building, I don't even have an actual date of origin. It was used heavily through the 80s, and then once the museum building was built, it kind of fell off use, and so we're looking at what we may do with that. And then the picture down on the bottom, the red roofed building, and then there's a white building behind it. So the red roofed building is the schoolhouse, and the white building at the back by the tree line is the pottery school. So the Pottery School was funded and started in the 1930s, about 1932. And part of it was, in that period, the Pamunkey on the reservation specifically were dependent on non-salary labor, so fishing, hunting, farming, and things like that. So the Virginia State Board of Education came in and implemented a teacher and built the Pottery School so that the Pamunkey women could use their traditional pottery techniques to create revenue for the reservation. So some of the things that came in during that period that was a little different and not part of the traditional Pamunkey pottery making was mold use, so being able to create molds for faster production. And a streamlined process. So basically, the whole idea was to create pieces much quicker for public sale. And at this time, the women were mostly selling down in the Jamestown area, so very tourist driven there. The Schoolhouse was built in May 1909, and this came off of something that had already occurred in the late 1800s. So in 1870, Virginia established a free statewide public school system that excluded Virginia tribes. And so the schoolhouse was built on the reservation. It served grades 1 through 7. After 7th grade, students were forced to attend BIA, or Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding school. The school served the community to 1948, and at that point, students went to the Mattaponi Reservation School or to a BIA boarding school. All right. So usually, too, I talk about the church in that. So there is a church on the reservation. It's the Pamunkey Baptist Church. It was built in 1865. Just to make sure we have time for questions in that, I'm gonna not give too much information on that particular building. And then I do want to talk quick about the hatchery. So the hatchery falls under the Natural Resource Department, but we do some programming sometimes for that. Currently, again, that's a building that's under our Historic Site Preservation Survey. What's the long-term use? How can we get funding to do programming? What is it going to look like? Historically, it's been used for shad. And for spawning, but shad spawning is a 24-hour process. It runs for a few weeks, and a lot of the elders that were doing that for a long time can't do that process anymore, so trying to get other people, other citizens involved in that work. Right. So talked a little bit already about the BIA, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding schools. The schools that the Pamunkey citizens were sent to included Bacone College in Oklahoma, Haskell Institute in Kansas, and Cherokee High School in North Carolina, among others. There are still Pamunkey elders today that attended BIA boarding schools as children. Through removal and brutal assimilation tactics, students were stripped of their languages, traditions, and cultures. The guiding principle for the United States government running the boarding school system in the late 19th century was kill the Indian him and save the man. You can see similar sentiments in the newspaper clippings here, including the Uncle Sam's Indian Wards article that reads, "What the government is doing to make first-class men and women of the sons and daughters of the real men, some excellent results." The students were forced through military-style remedial education, as shown in some of the photos here from 2 boarding schools that the Pamunkey tribal citizens attended. So you can see the military formation both in front of the school and in the dormitory spaces for both boys and for girls. The children are returned emotionally scarred, culturally unrooted with trauma that has echoed down the generations. Many students never return home due to displacement or death. Few elders speak of their experience at these schools, and many families have been unable to heal the generational trauma caused. This evening, I've spoken on the impacts of colonization and the devastation it has caused Native communities historically. Today, the trauma caused by boarding schools is one of many issues produced and perpetuated by colonization. So I'd like to get into some contemporary things that are affecting Native communities today. On reservations specifically, just talk briefly about housing. So for the Pamunkey Indian Tribe, housing is done via allotment. So an individual is allotted a portion of tribal land. The tribe still owns the land, and I say owns because ownership of land is a very different concept with Native communities. But for this space, the tribe owns the land and has a citizen gets a portion or an allotment on the reservation. One thing that is an issue here is housing. So in order to be able to build a stick-built home on a reservation, you have to front the cost. You cannot mortgage it because you do not own the land. So that is why a lot of reservations across the country, houses are mobile homes. You mortgage the mobile home because the bank can take it. They can't take the property, but they can take the mobile home. So that's why housing is such an issue. Mobile homes today typically last about 30 years. So by the time you've paid your mortgage, you're then having to probably go down the rabbit hole of getting another mobile home if you are unable to, again, build a stick built up front. Another issue is land use, so whether that's farming, land clearing, or just construction projects. The two top photos, one is my office, so that is the Tribal Resource Center there, and the other one is farming land that's leased on the reservation. So with land use becomes land issues. That includes climate change. So the reservation specifically, that is erosion. So that's shoreline erosion, soil erosion. We are currently actively working on several shoreline mitigation projects, but things like the leased farming and that only adds to the erosion on the reservation itself. Talk about two things too, again, on a national scale. One is substance abuse, primarily alcohol abuse, but also other substance abuse issues are prevalent within Native American communities. 1 in 5 Native American young adults has a substance abuse disorder, so that's ages 18 to 25. Data indicates that Native Americans and Alaskan Natives make up approximately 1.7% of the United States population, but have the highest rate of alcohol, marijuana, cocaine, and other drug issue disorders when compared to other ethnic groups. So that's a national crisis. That's not just here in Virginia. And same with domestic violence. Native American women are 2.5 times more likely to experience sexual assault than other Native American women. Amnesty International found that 1 in 3 Native American women reported having been raped during their lifetime, and that 86% of the offenses were committed by non-Native men. Non-Native perpetrators exploit gaps in tribal jurisdiction authority and target Native women as safe victims because they have near impunity. So again, this is a national crisis, particularly with some of the larger reservations on major highway routes out west. Excuse me. And then additionally, kind of on the national umbrella, federal recognition and legal status for tribes. We talked about that process, how long it takes, and there's also calls that it's not appropriate and by many Native communities. You have colonizers coming in, they strip you of all of your things, but then you have to go back to them to then be a legal entity and to serve as a nation. Just wrap your head around that one for a second. It's a lot. And again, I could speak at length just on that single topic. But there's also healthcare, education, and employment. A lot of it is here in Virginia, particularly for the Pamunkey community, is because the reservation is in a rural area. Most citizens drive about an hour one way just to work. A lot of our tribal citizens are lower income, so they have to use Indian Health Services or IHS benefits. So these are all things that are ongoing and again are national issues for a lot of the communities. But with that, ways to support Indigenous communities today. And if you leave today with anything, focus here. So the biggest one is to be an ally, educate yourself. I always am asked in my role and how I do my job, what's something that I can suggest? My biggest one is listen. If I didn't listen, I would not be able to do my job very well. So I think that's part of being an ally and educating yourself to do better. Provide a platform. So the rise of social media has been huge. So most Native Americans in 1920 increased their news consumption by 41% compared to 2019. That's huge. A big portion of that is because about 96% of Native Americans use their cell phones due to internet issues and things like that. So the ability to have social media and the news coming through that is really great, and is changed how things are discussed on a contemporary level. And really the big question now is, how can media be more inclusive for Native Americans to bring their stories from their communities to the forefront? I think projects like Illuminative, Native Rights Fund, Native American Rights Fund, Social Distance Powwow that came out of the pandemic, all of these things bring light to movements that are happening within Native communities that you wouldn't otherwise see or hear. And it's also created connection for Native American communities across the country. And then a big one, we talked a little bit already, is reparations, payment. Pay people for the work that they're doing, okay? If you're reaching out to a tribal citizen for their knowledge, for their help, for their expertise, pay them for the work that they're doing. I even say, you know, if you follow someone on Instagram that you like, or a cultural bearer, or an artist, or a maker, pay them. That's what Cash App's for, that's what Venmo's for. Utilize it. And then obviously respect tribal culture and traditions. Avoid cultural appropriation at all costs. I'm sure all of you have seen some of the things that have come up in the news recently. You know, schools still allowing cheerleaders to wear regalia headdresses, you know, the gamut. Not appropriate. So always being mindful of how you are interacting too. Don't approach you know, a Native person and think that they're going to tell you the whole world. That's also part of that cultural appropriation umbrella there. And then my biggest one is collaboration and partnership. Build partnerships, build capacity for Native Americans, do land acknowledgements, but I'll tell you, when land acknowledgements requests come through my office, if it is just to do work on a land acknowledgement and it is not collaboration and partnership thereafter, we do not work on it. That is not what land acknowledgement is, so be mindful of that. And then promote and support Native artists. You know, make sure when you're buying online that you are buying from a Native artist and making sure that you're supporting them. So that's it. I want to say thank you to all of you for listening and bearing with me. I redid my lecture recently, so still trying to get through doing it without all of my notes. But I want to say thank you. And I do want to take the time to open the floor. If anyone has questions, conversation, I'm happy to do that with all of you. So, thank you.
In 32, you opened the Pottery School to like a World Bank approach of monetizing stuff, right?
Yep.
That was the point. Has there been any effort to have a genuine school that honors and teaches the next generation the Pamunkey history and arts?
Yeah, so there is the Pamunkey Pottery Guild is still in place. Actually, when I came on and took over directorship of the museum, it was from the guild. Again, a lot of the elders, the financial side of it had become a lot, so came in and took that on. There are still elders teaching different younger generations pottery. That's been ongoing throughout generations. And the pottery school is still in use. So one portion we have closed currently, it's more of the historical building. But the kiln room, we still have tribal citizens use. It's open for access. And in addition to the kiln, most citizens on the reservation that do pottery also have their own pits to do pit firing for blackware. So it is an ongoing tradition. Cultural bearers are still sharing their ways, and they are still pulling Pamunkey clay out of the river all the time, which is really great. So the Pamunkey does not have a powwow at this time and hasn't had one in a long time, but a lot of the tribal citizens participate in a lot of the other powwows here in Virginia and in other states too. Yep, NAGPRA. Yep. Yeah.
I would like to know, I'm a descendant of the Pamunkey Indian Tribe. When are they going to change the bylaw about tribal members that left because of going for work and different things like that to be recognized back into the tribe?
Yep.
My great-grandfather and Chief Miles were brothers, and he left for work.
Yeah, so the tribe has redone their enrollment process in the last several years, and so there are two ways for a person to enroll. So I always tell people to visit the pamunkey.org, and there is an enrollment page, and there are two different applications for enrollment for qualifying. You're getting your steps in today, right?
What can you tell me about pre-contact government of these people? How do they choose their degree? How are laws enforced?
Yeah. So pre-contact, I talked a little bit about it, but again, didn't get into it too much. The way that the structure would have been, we're talking about a matrilineal society. So an individual's status or power in the society would be based off of their mother's status or power in society. And so that's where a lot of the leadership would come out of women who had power or standing within the communities. During the Powhatan Confederacy, Powhatan was able to create a confederation. And so with that, would had power and backing from different tribes too. Yeah, so I say adjacent to King William County when I use language there. So technically it is King William County. Our hours do vary, so I always tell people to follow our Facebook page, but if you are not on Facebook, our Google hours, if you search the museum, we have a Google. The hours are always updated there. Right now, this week, in the next couple weeks, we are Wednesday to Sunday, and it's 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we have two new museum associates. They're both members of the community, so really excited to have them on board. So it depends. I mean, COVID really hit a lot of our programming, just like it has with everyone else. Right now, what we've been focusing on is doing kind of some umbrella programming. So we just worked with William and Mary to do programming on site for their NIAD, their summer program for incoming students. We've been working with the Smithsonian Institute to do teacher workshops so that we have indigenous and native people having input in what is going into schools to be taught, which is really, really important. So that's been a real focus in some of our on-site programming and our virtual programming. But we are working to try to develop more workshops right now for tribal citizens. Again, with COVID, a lot of the cultural classes fell off, particularly on their reservation. And so we are really working with some of the cultural bearers to do new classes and that for tribal citizens. But we do private tours and programs at the museum. I run most of those, and I work with tribal citizens depending on topics that people want to do too.
One is, to what extent does the museum or the work that you're doing talk about the relationship between this community and the African American community in the area. And then the second, I think it's somewhat related, this whole, we're kind of going through this, I'm just going to call it truth telling. So in terms of your tours with the children, the school-age children, to what extent do you talk about the injustices?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the age group is one, but for fourth grade, we do talk about the Civil War. We do talk about Indian Neck or Indian Town being a reprieve for runaway slaves for a lot of the period, definitely with the Civil War too, because just prior to the Civil War, the railroad is built just at the entrance of the reservation as you're coming in, and so the movement of people influxes with the use of the railroad in that area also. We do talk about some of that, particular to the Civil War. The installation that we have outside of the main older exhibition, we put in place in June of last year, and it's kind of a catch-all, but it's mostly focused in the late 1880s through to about 1920. That is a space that will continue to evolve and change, and that will be through work with tribal citizens. So our upcoming one that we're hoping to be able to do is an art installation. It'll be a community art installation focused on climate change as a background for art. So really excited about that, but that space will be the space that we will continue to use as a different area, both for contemporary narrative, but then also for addressing things that need to be talked about too, and a lot of cross-community collaboration. We've been working on the Recontextualizing Richmond project. So we had one of our artists just do installation, and that was a collaborative with many communities at Belle Isle. And we'll have one coming up in October that will be focused specifically on Native communities in Virginia. So we're doing more of that work in public programming and in the city of Richmond, just because it's a place to really pull partnerships together very easily. We've been working with the Black History Museum on some things, so really, really great work there.
I think it's real important for children. I worked at a museum in Portsmouth. This is just recently, like 4 or 5 years ago, and folks were concerned about talking about enslavement to young children. And that can be a very sensitive area for some people. So I just think it's kind of reinforcing things.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the groups that we have come in. I did a tour recently with Temple Sinai out of Newport News, and so talking with some elders, again, about that erasure. While it's a different community, there's connection there. And so, there's a lot of ways to talk about that, and there's ways to talk about that with kids. I'll be frank, a lot of kids that come in, they literally ask, when am I going to see a real Indian? And so then breaking that question down, like really though, you have to break it down and talk to a child about what they think a real Indian is. And it's basically the 1920s, very westernized, heavy regalia that we do have on view in the collection, and talking about that. But then talking about contemporary, indigenous people and, they're doctors, lawyers, and all the things. And so, teaching. Providing context is very important. Yep.
You really are getting work out. I'm just curious about the language. Is it being taught?
So Algonquin is I do not use the term lost language. I don't like that language, but it is, there is currently a resurgence. Chickahominy, the Chickahominy Indian Tribe and Chickahominy Indian Tribe Eastern Division have gotten some grant funding recently to do some language work, and that is intertribal. And so really excited to see where that work goes. The problem a lot of times is when doing that type of work, Native communities really have to rely heavily on academics, and so I think they're trying to do that in a different way with this project. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to learn with the community that I work with and kind of see what comes out of that. We do keep a running list of words from the community. Pronunciations, again, like I opened with, they vary, and so taking notes. Also, with any projects that we do now, particularly with museums for exhibition work, we provide phonetics for everything. So to make sure that people are not just reading over an Algonquin word or an indigenous term and not understanding or knowing how to say it, because what's the point of putting it in there in the first place? So that work is ongoing, but I'm really excited to kind of see where that funding and that project goes for the program.
I have two sort of questions in terms of bringing money in. Do they do any? You mentioned about land not being owned by the individuals, so we can't get mortgages. Do they go after any federal or state funding for housing?
We have a housing program which we work with HUD, and so like we did a rehab project fairly recently. It was the most recent one. So again, doing some delayed maintenance in both some of the historical homes that are on the reservation and some of the mobile homes that are on the reservation.
And the second part, I know the land grant universities, especially the one in Petersburg, was doing work a couple years ago with farm-raised catfish, trying to teach tobacco farmers something else to bring in, stuff. Has there been any coordination or collaboration with colleges like that?
Yep. Oh yeah. So we work with VIMS. We work with William and Mary, VCU. The most recent kind of one that was a multi-partner was the Sturgeon Resurgent project. The Pamunkey did work on that. So that was 2017, and actually that grant and that work just closed out. So that was obviously a really great one, and a lot of our female fisher anglers worked on that, which was really cool to see them be able to get the experience and do that work. So.
Okay, I have two more questions. So the first question is, other than William and Mary and VCU, what other colleges do you guys collab with? Also, is there for people who are non-native or native and want to just explore more, with talking with the elders or just helping out at the reservation, what way or how could somebody get into that?
Mm-hmm. So I'll address the second question first. We are working through that. Again, it's capacity. I'll be honest, our tribal government right now, outside of chief and council, is 4 employees. And we do everything. So we've had a lot of outreach about internships, volunteering. I personally cannot take on volunteers or interns at the museum because I don't have time to manage them. It's just a reality that we're in right now. Until we can build out more employees under better funding, I won't have those opportunities. But I'll tell you, the second we do, they'll go on our Facebook page. So keep an eye on that. And then for the other one, what was the first one? I'm sorry, love.
The first one was just what other colleges do you guys collab with?
So we work with a lot of different higher institutes of higher education. I've been working a lot with UVA, as have a lot of the tribes here in Virginia, working on DEI justice, different initiatives, and also working with Virginia Tech on a project currently. A lot of those, though, like I said, are intertribal, so a lot of tribes are doing work with them. We're very lucky. One of our tribal citizens, Dr. Ashley Spivey, went to William and Mary. She's an anthropologist and an archaeologist, so that has been a really good relationship with William and Mary in that capacity. So.
Okay, this will be our last question for the evening.
Thank you. I just wanted to know if you can expand upon your partnerships to provide further outreach to teach about the history and culture. Outside of the higher education, what other partnerships do you guys have?
Yeah, so the biggest one that we have right now, geared specifically towards Virginia teachers and looking mostly for that 4th grade sweet spot for SOLs, has been the Smithsonian doing a teachers workshop. So we just did 2 webinar series, and they are actually building out a booklet and a storybook that Virginia teachers will be able to have publicly on the website to then use in the classroom. So the webinars have been kind of a trial and error for that project. And then we're going to host all of the teachers that participated in both webinars on the reservation for a full day program. So that's one that we're doing. The other one that I'm really pushing Virginia teachers to do right now also is it's a collaboration between the Valentine, the Virginia Museum of History Culture, and Virginia Day program. They're going to be doing an on-site teacher workshop at the Valentine. I believe it's in October of this year. So a full day, and literally they're going to hand resources for teachers to implement in the classroom, which is really cool. And we worked on some of the narrative and some of the class and resources for that particular project. So, awesome.
Okay, well, I would like to thank you all for coming out this evening. Thank you again, Shaleigh. We really do appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed yourself. Have a good evening.